The pen felt heavier than it should have. As I signed my name at the bottom of papers I barely understood, trusting the son who'd placed them in front of me with a smile and words about boring tax stuff that would make things easier for everyone. My name is Rose Fontaine. I'm 81 years old, and I want to thank anyone willing to listen to my story. Because sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest, and sometimes the only way to heal is to tell the truth, even when it's painful. It started 3 months before that devastating eviction notice appeared on my bedroom door. Robert, my 47-year-old son, had come over for what I thought was just a regular visit. He'd been fidgety, distracted, checking his phone more than usual while I made his favorite chocolate chip cookies. Mom, I need you to sign some documents, he'd sent, pulling out a manila folder. Just routine stuff for the house. Tax implications, you know how complicated the government makes everything, and I should have read them more carefully. I should have asked questions. But this was Robert, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, the man I'd put through law school by taking double shifts at the diner, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. What exactly am I signing? I'd ask, squinting at the legal language that seemed to swim before my eyes. Nothing major. Just updating some ownership documents so if anything happens to you, the transition will be smoother for everyone. Lisa's been worried about the legal complications. You know how she gets about paperwork. Lisa, my daughter-in-law of 15 years, a real estate agent who spoke in acronyms and always seemed to be calculating square footage and property values, even during family dinners. She was 38, blonde, efficient, and had never quite warmed to having a mother-in-law living in what she considered their future inheritance. Will this affect my living here? I'd ask. Of course not, Mom. This is your home. Nothing changes that. So I signed Rose Fontaine in my careful cursive, trusting that love meant protection, that family meant safety. 3 months later, my 24-year-old grandson, Michael Robert's eldest, a recent college graduate who still looked uncomfortable in his business suits, stood in my bedroom doorway holding that yellow eviction notice like it might bite him. I'm sorry, Grandma Rose, he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad made me be the one to tell you. Made him. As if delivering devastating news to your own grandmother was a chore to be assigned rather than a conversation requiring 30 days, I repeated, staring at the legal document. You're giving me 30 days to leave my own home. The nursing home is really nice, Michael said quickly, like he was Sunset Manor. They have activities every day and cable TV in all the rooms. Dad says you'll make friends there. Friends. As if friendship could be scheduled between bingo and medication time. As if companionship could replace the weight of belonging somewhere. Where's your father? I asked. At work. Big case this week. Michael shifted uncomfortably. But he agrees this is for the best. For the best. The phrase that had become the family motto whenever they made decisions about my life without consulting me. I found Lisa in the kitchen, wrapping my wedding china in newspaper with the efficiency of someone packing for a garage sale. She looked up when I entered, her face bright with the kind of forced cheer that people use when they're trying to convince themselves they're doing something kind. Oh, Rose, I was just getting your special pieces ready. The movers will be so careful with them. What movers? Well, you won't need all this furniture where you're going. Sunset Manor is fully furnished, and honestly, at your age, less is more, don't you think? She was 38 years old, this woman who was casually dismantling my life, young enough to be my daughter, old enough to know better, but somehow convinced that age gave her the right to make decisions for someone who'd been managing her own affairs since before Lisa was born. That night, I began making phone calls. My sister Helen in Florida first. Rosie? Helen's voice was warm with surprise. How lovely to hear from you. Helen, I need help. I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. When was the last time I'd ask anyone for anything? Robert and Lisa are putting me in a nursing home. They've given me 30 days to leave. There was a pause, then a sigh. Oh, honey, are you sure this isn't for the best? I mean, at our age, having professional care available 24/7, I don't need professional care, Helen. I need family. I need somewhere to belong. Well, yes, but Rosie, I'd love to help, but Jim and I are barely managing in this tiny condo, and with his diabetes and my arthritis, I understood now, but understanding didn't make the rejection hurt less. I called my nephew David in California, my late brother's son, now 45 with teenagers of his own. Then my niece Patricia in Denver, a busy pediatrician with 3 children under 10. I even called my late husband's brother Frank, 79, and living in a retirement community in Arizona. The conversations followed the same pattern: initial sympathy, followed by explanations of why helping wasn't possible, followed by gentle suggestions that maybe professional care really would be better at my age. By the end of the week, I had exhausted every family connection I could think of. I was alone in a way I'd never imagined possible, surrounded by people who shared my blood but not my burden. Sunset Manor was exactly as advertised: clean, well managed, staffed by kind people who called me Sweetie and Han, but never looked me in the eye long enough to see me as a person rather than a patient. My room was on the second floor, with a view of the parking lot and a small bathroom that smelled perpetually of industrial disinfectant. Lisa had brought a few of my photographs and one of my quilts, arranging them like props in a stage set designed to look like home. The pictures looked strange on the institutional dresser: my wedding photo, pictures of Robert's graduation, images of grandchildren who had already started to feel like strangers. "See," Lisa said brightly, fluffing the pillows on my narrow bed. "It's cozy. And you'll have so much help here. No more worrying about cooking or cleaning or any of that tedious stuff. The daily rhythms that had given my life structure and meaning reduced to inconveniences that were better handled by strangers." Robert stood behind her, hands shoved deep in his pockets, studying the linoleum floor like it held the secrets of the universe. He was tall like his father had been, with the same dark hair now touched with gray at the temples, but he'd inherited my tendency to avoid difficult conversations by pretending they weren't happening. "You'll be happy here, Mom," he said without looking at me. "The staff seems really nice, and there are people your own age to talk to, people my own," as if that were the only qualification for friendship, as if shared birth decades could substitute for shared interests, values, or genuine affection. They left after an hour, promising to visit regularly, and I sat in my new chair by my new window and wondered how I had become the kind of problem that needed to be managed rather than loved. The first weeks at Sunset Manor blurred together in a haze of scheduled meals and medication times, and activities designed to keep us busy rather than engaged. I played bingo because it was something to do. I attended craft time because the alternative was staring at my 4 walls. And I made polite conversation with my fellow residents because silence felt like giving up. But late at night, when the hallways grew quiet and the only sounds were the distant murmur of the night shift and the occasional cry of someone lost in dreams or dementia, I grieved for the life I'd been dismissed from without trial or appeal. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into my residency, I was going through the small box of personal papers Lisa had packed for me. She'd grabbed them haphazardly from my desk drawer, a random collection of insurance documents, old tax returns, and family papers I'd kept more from habit than necessity. At the bottom of the box, I found something that made my heart stop: Thomas's will, my late husband's will, which I hadn't looked at since the lawyer had read it to me after the. I unfolded the yellow document with trembling fingers, scanning through the legal language until I found what I was looking for: the house on Maple Street. I've left to me, Rose Margaret Fontaine, to be hers absolutely and without condition for the duration of her natural life. But it was the next paragraph that made me sit up straighter, that sent a jolt of electricity through my tired bones. "In the event that Rose Margaret Fontaine predeceases the undersigned, or in the event of her death, the property shall pass to Robert James Fontaine. However, during Rose Margaret Fontaine's lifetime, no transfer, sale, or conveyance of said property shall be valid without her explicit written consent, witnessed and notarized, specifically acknowledging her understanding that such transfer would result in the loss of her residence rights." I read it 3 times, then a fourth, the words burning themselves into my memory. Thomas had protected me even from beyond the grave. He'd known somehow that there might come a day when family loyalty wasn't enough to guarantee my security. the papers Robert had made me sign. Those routine tax documents, they meant nothing. They couldn't mean anything because Thomas's will explicitly prevented exactly what Robert had tried to do. My hands weren't trembling anymore. They were steady as stone as I reached for the phone and dialed a number I'd memorized 30 years ago. Zimmer and Associates, this is Janet. Hello, Janet. This is Rose Fontaine. Is Harold available? I need to see him immediately. Harold Zimmer had been Thomas's friend since law school, a small man with kind eyes who'd handled our simple legal affairs for decades. He was 75 now, technically semi-retired, but he still took calls from old clients who needed help navigating the complexities of the law. When I showed up at his office the next morning, having signed myself out of Sunset Manor for the day and taken a taxi downtown, his face went white as I explained what had happened. Rose, they can't do this, he said, adjusting his glasses as he examined Thomas's will. This document is ironclad. The house is yours until you die, period. No exceptions, no transfers, no legal maneuvers. But I signed papers that had no legal standing whatsoever. Harold's voice was growing angry, something I'd rarely heard from this gentleman. What Robert did, having you sign documents under false pretenses, that's fraud. Pure and simple. Can we get the house back? We can do better than that. Harold pulled out a yellow legal. We can file criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. We can sue for damages. We can make sure this kind of thing never happens to another elderly person in this county. I thought about this, about courtrooms and depositions and family members forced to testify against each other. I thought about Michael, barely 24 and probably horrified by what his father had done. I thought about my other grandson, Tommy, only 19 and away at college, who would come home to find his family destroyed by legal battles. I don't want to destroy them, I said finally. I just want my life back. Harold studied my face. What do you want to do? I want the house back first. Then I want to decide what comes next. It took Harold exactly one phone call. Robert, this is Harold Zimmer. I'm calling about your mother's house. No, you need to listen to me very carefully. The documents you had her sign are completely invalid. Your father's will explicitly prevents any transfer of the property during your mother's lifetime. Yes, I'm looking at it right now. No, this isn't a negotiation. You have 48 hours to restore the property to your mother's name and remove any claims you filed, or I'll be filing criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. I could hear Robert's voice through the phone, high in panic, but I couldn't make out the words. I don't care what your intentions were, Harold continued. You defrauded an elderly woman and took her home through deception. Fix it or face the consequences. When he hung up, Harold turned to me with something approaching a smile. He'll today, probably. Men like Robert, they fold fast when they realize the law isn't on their side. What about the eviction notice, invalid from the moment it was? You could go home right now if you wanted to. But I didn't want to. Not yet. Because something had shifted inside me during those weeks at Sunset Manor, something that had nothing to do with legal documents or property rights. I discovered what it felt like to be discarded, and I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Harold, I said slowly, I want to sell the house. His eyebrows shot up. Sell it as soon as possible. Everything in it, too. I want it liquidated completely. Rose, are you sure? This is your home we're talking about. 43 years of memories, 43 years of memories that led to me being thrown away like garbage when I became inconvenient. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. I won't go back to being tolerated in a place where I'm not wanted. Harold was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Where will you go? I thought about the travel brochures I'd collected over the years, the places Thomas and I had planned to visit someday. I thought about the money I'd saved, the investments I'd made, the life I could still build if I had the courage to start over. Paris, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I'm going to Paris. The house sold in 8 weeks. Harold had recommended a real estate agent who specialized in quick sales, a sharp woman in her 50s who understood that I wanted efficiency more than maximum profit. The buyers were a young couple with twin toddlers who were thrilled to find such a well-maintained property in a good neighborhood. I didn't tell anyone at Sunset Manor about my plans. As far as they knew, I was simply transitioning back to independent living, which was true enough, just not in the way they assumed. The phone calls from my family started 3 days after Harold's conversation with Robert. First, Robert himself, his voice tight with panic and something that might have been shame. "Mom, I need to talk to you. About the house, about what happened. The house is being sold," I said calmly. "Sold? But Mom, we live here. The kids' school, Lisa's job, our whole life is here." "Your whole life was built on my property," I replied. "I'm taking back what's mine. Can we please talk about this? Can I come see you?" "You can try, but I'm not available for conversations about how to fix what you broke, Robert. I'm only available for conversations about what happens next." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm leaving the country. I'm moving to Paris. I'm moving to Paris." I could hear him struggling to process this information, this idea that his mother, who had spent her entire adult life being available for other people's needs, was suddenly making decisions based entirely on her own desires. "You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Lisa called the next day, her voice shrill with desperation. "Rose, this is insane. You're 81 years old. You can't just move to France. What if you get sick? What if you need help? Then I'll figure it out, the same way I figured out how to raise a child alone after Thomas died. The same way I figured out how to pay for Robert's education. The same way I figured out how to survive being betrayed by the people I trusted most. We were trying to help you betrayed by yourselves. There's a difference." Even Michael called, his young voice uncertain and sad. "Grandma Rose, I'm sorry about how Dad handled things. I didn't know about the papers, about what they really meant." "I believe you, sweetheart," I said. Michael was a good boy, caught between his father's ambition and his own conscience. "But believing you doesn't change what happened. Is there anything I can do? Any way to fix this?" I thought about this 24-year-old boy, just starting his career, trying to navigate family loyalties and moral obligations. "Be better than your father," I said finally. "When your time comes to care for the people who raised you," remember this conversation. Harold handled all the legal details of the sale. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in November, and I arranged to be there to sign the final papers and collect my check. The buyers, Sarah and Michael Patterson, were perhaps 35, both teachers, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of buying their first house, but glowing with the particular happiness of people whose dreams are coming true. "We love what you've done with the place," Sarah told me as we sat around the conference table. "Especially the kitchen. Those cabinets are gorgeous. My husband installed those in 1978, I said. "He spent 3 weeks getting them exactly level. We promised to take good care of everything," Michael Patterson added. "We know how much this place must mean to you." I looked at this young couple, so eager to build their life in the house where I'd built mine, and felt something I hadn't expected, genuine happiness for their joy. "It's a good house," I said. "It knows how to hold love. Just make sure you fill it with the right kind." When the papers were signed and the check was in my hands, more money than I'd ever seen at one time, enough to live comfortably anywhere in the world, I walked outside and stood on the sidewalk across from 247 Maple Street. Robert's car was in the driveway. Lisa was loading boxes into her SUV, probably moving them to her mother's house where they'd been staying since I'd reclaimed the property. I could see neighbors watching from their windows, probably wondering what drama was unfolding in what had always been such a quiet street. Robert came out carrying a lamp I recognized, one I'd given him and Lisa for their 5th wedding anniversary. He saw me standing there and stopped, setting the lamp down on the porch. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the street that had divided us He looked older than his 47 years, his face drawn with stress and something that might have been regret. He raised his hand, a small wave that could have been greeting or goodbye. I didn't wave back. Instead, I turned and walked to Harold's car, where he was waiting to drive me to the airport. Any regrets? Harold asked as we pulled away from the curb. I watched my old neighborhood disappear in the rearview mirror, the tree-lined streets where I'd walked my son to school, where I'd chatted with neighbors over garden fences, where I'd lived a life that had seemed permanent until the day it wasn't. Only that it took me 81 years to realize I deserved better, I said. The flight to Paris was long and uncomfortable, but every mile we traveled felt like distance between me and the woman I'd been, the one who apologized for existing, who was grateful for scraps of attention, who made herself smaller so others could feel bigger. My apartment was perfect, a small place in the 7th arrondissement with tall windows and a view of a tree-lined street. Claire, my travel agent, had arranged everything beautifully, including a local service to help me navigate the practical details of living in a foreign country. Madame Dubois, who managed my building, was perhaps 60, elegant and kind, with the sort of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. "You are here for vacation?" she asked in careful English as she showed me to my apartment. "I'm here for the rest of my life," I said, and felt a thrill of possibility in the Paris embraced me in ways my family never had, without conditions, without expectations, without the need to justify my presence or apologize for taking up space. I spent my first week simply walking, getting lost in neighborhoods whose names I couldn't pronounce, sitting in cafes where no one expected me to explain myself. I enrolled in French classes at the Alliance Francaise, surrounded by people half my age who welcomed me with the easy acceptance of fellow travelers trying to make sense of a new world. My teacher, Madame Laurent, was perhaps my age, elegant and patient. "Why did you come to Paris?" she asked me after class one day. "Because I always meant to," I said. And I finally realized that someday was turning into never. She smiled. "Très bien, better late than never, non?" "Much better," I agreed. Months passed. I developed routines: morning coffee at the cafe on the corner, afternoon walks along the Seine, evening French lessons, followed by simple dinners eaten while watching the sunset paint my apartment gold. I made friends slowly but genuinely: Jean-Pierre, the baker who saved me the best croissants; Elizabeth, a widow my age who lived across the street and invited me for Sunday dinner; other expatriates who understood what it meant to start over in a new country. These people knew nothing of my history, nothing of the family who discarded me. They knew only Rose, the American woman learning French and determined to wring every drop of joy from her remaining years. One morning, about 6 months after my arrival, I was having coffee at my usual cafe when a familiar figure appeared at the next table. My heart nearly stopped. Robert. He looked terrible, older, thinner, with the hollow eyes of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. He was staring at his phone, probably trying to work up the courage to call someone. I could have approached him. I could have offered conversation or conflict or at least acknowledgement. But I remembered the 30 days notice, the paper signed under false pretenses, the casual dismissal of my feelings and needs. Instead, I finished my coffee slowly, left money on the table, and walked away. Paris was large enough to hold both of us without requiring us to intersect. That evening, my phone rang, the French phone I'd bought, not the American one I'd left behind. "Rose, there is a man asking for you," Madame Dubois said. "An American president. He says he is your son." I looked around my apartment at the life I'd built from nothing, at the peace I'd cultivated so carefully. "Tell him I'm not available," I said. "But Rose, tell him I'm not available and that I won't be available. If he needs to leave a message, he can write a letter and leave it at the desk." I found the letter slipped under my door the next morning. "Mom, I know you don't want to see me. I understand why. The house sold last month. We're living in Lisa's mother's basement now. She filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. She blames me for everything that happened, says I destroyed the family by what I did to you." She's right. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo what I did, and I don't know how to be the man my sons need me to be. I just know that I'm sorry and I miss you and I wish I could take it all back. I love you, Robert. I read the letter once, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer with my important documents. I didn't feel triumph at his suffering. I felt something quieter and sadder, the recognition that consequences like gravity operate whether we acknowledge them or. That afternoon, I did something I'd been meaning to do since I arrived in Paris. I walked to the American Express office and opened a safety deposit box where I placed Thomas's will, my French residency papers, and a new will I'd had translated into French. Everything I owned, the proceeds from the house sale, my modest investments, the money I'd saved over 8 decades of careful living, would go to organizations supporting displaced elderly people and women starting over later in life. There was no mention of my American family. It wasn't revenge, it was simply the recognition that money, like love, should go to people who understand its value. As I walked home through the golden light of a Paris evening, I thought about the different kinds of endings. Some endings are forced on you, others you choose for yourself, and those are the ones that feel like freedom. My phone was ringing when I got home. Elizabeth inviting me for dinner. I have someone I want you to meet, she said. Another American woman just arrived. She's staying in my building while she looks for an apartment. She seems lonely. I'd love to meet her, I said. The woman was named Grace, 79 years old, recently widowed, recently displaced from her family home by well-meaning children who thought she'd be safer in assisted living. Like me, she discovered she owned more than she'd realized and had more choices than anyone had told her. We talked for hours over Elizabeth's excellent cooking and even better wine, sharing the particular understanding that comes from having survived the same specific kind of abandonment. Do you ever regret it? Grace asked, leaving everything behind. I looked around Elizabeth's warm apartment, at the easy intimacy of new friendships, at the way the candlelight made everything feel possible. I regret that it took me 81 years to realize I had the right to choose myself, I said. But I don't regret anything that's happened since. 2 years have passed now. I'm 83, living in a city that still surprises me daily with its beauty and acceptance. I've learned to make proper French onion soup and decent small talk in French. I've discovered I have a talent for watercolor painting and an unexpected gift for making people laugh. Grace found an apartment 6 blocks from mine. We meet for coffee every Tuesday and dinner every Friday, along with a growing circle of expatriate women who've chosen adventure over safety, authenticity over acceptance. I received one more letter from Robert about a year ago. He moved to Portland, started over in a smaller firm, was trying to rebuild his relationship with his sons. He didn't ask for forgiveness or money or even contact. He just wanted me to know that he was trying to be better. I wrote back, the only communication I've had with my old life, just one sentence. I'm proud of you for trying. Yesterday was my 83rd birthday. I celebrated by taking myself to lunch at a small restaurant overlooking the Seine, then spent the afternoon painting in the Tuileries Gardens. The light was perfect, and I managed to capture something I'd been trying to get right for months, the way shadows and sunlight dance together on water. As the sun set, I walked slowly home through streets that no longer felt foreign, past shopkeepers who greeted me by name, through a city that had welcomed me without conditions or reservations. At my apartment, I made tea and sat in my favorite chair with a book surrounded by the life I'd chosen rather than the one that had been chosen for me. Through my windows, Paris hummed with the endless possibility of people creating their own stories, their own meanings, their own definitions of home. I was part of that now, no longer waiting for someone else's permission to live fully. I am Rose Fontaine, American expatriate, student of French, lover of good coffee and long walks, and the particular quality of light that paints my apartment walls gold every evening. I am enough, exactly as I am. And for the first time in my life, I truly believe that tomorrow I'm meeting Grace for coffee. Then we're taking the train to Provence for a week of painting workshops and wine tasting. At 83, I'm still learning new things, still making new friends, still choosing joy over bitterness and possibility over regret. They thought they were discarding me when they put me in that nursing home. Instead, they set me free. And freedom, it turns out, looks exactly like choosing yourself, one small decision at a time until you've built a life that fits who you really are. Say perfect. It's perfect.